This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse murder and their families. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 203, Child and Survivor Advocacy with Dale Margolin Cecka. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, and most likely even if you haven't, you know the U.S. legal system all too often fails domestic abuse survivors, especially women, children, and adolescents. My guest, Professor Dale Margolin Cecka, knows it all too well. Professor Cecka is an advocate for women, children, and teens who have survived domestic abuse. Not only that, but she's also a law professor, former Superior Court senior staff attorney, former Assistant Attorney General of Georgia, and the director of Albany Law School's Family Violence Litigation Clinic. For this episode, I talked with Professor Cecka about her experience and expertise and many related topics. I think you'll enjoy this fascinating conversation as much as I did. This is my conversation with Professor Dale Margolin Cecka.
My name is Dale Margolin Cecka. I'm a professor at Albany Law School, and I run the Family Violence Litigation Clinic at the law school, which, if your listeners don't know, is an in-house clinical experience for third-year law students, which means that we take live in-house clients and I supervise students, third-year students, on directly representing them. So it's both a way for students, law students, to actually gain real experience during law school, but also it provides a service to the community because we are filling legal needs that are not otherwise met. So up in Albany in the Capital Region in New York is where I am right now, running a clinic that represents victims and survivors of domestic violence, mostly adult women and their children. I use the terms victim and survivor kind of interchangeably. And I also will mostly say she because all of our clients are women. So we represent our clients on, of course, protective orders, civil protective orders, but also custody, child support, matrimonial or divorce cases, paternity, and, anything else that the survivor needs to be safe with her children. And I came to this work in kind of very unusual for someone going to law school. I went directly for the purpose of representing at the time, my sole purpose was representing children in foster care, but also I just wanted to do direct legal services for indigent and marginalized populations. And I was very, very driven to work with children in foster care. I had come across, so to speak, this population when I was like a freshman in college. I did some volunteer work with kids in foster care, and I was just so moved and inspired by their stories and by their struggles. And I couldn't think of doing anything else once I really kind of learned about this whole world that to many of us, especially, coming from certain backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, we don't necessarily interface with the child welfare system very often, but that is not the case for marginalized communities of color who have CPS and social services kind of in their business all the time. And I was just really moved by just many of the tragic things I saw. So I went to law school solely for that purpose. I immediately also did a clinic in law school, and I worked with representing kids in foster care at the Legal Aid Society of New York City. And then after law school, I was awarded I was really honored. I was awarded this prestigious Skadden Fellowship, and I designed a project that was to represent pregnant and parenting teenagers who were aging out of foster care. So you can imagine that is an extremely vulnerable population. It's like a double, triple whammy of these are young women who had, most of them had been in foster care for almost their entire lives. Many of them were, in group homes and other placements that were really, that they suffered abuse within their placements. And then they were pregnant and or already parenting. So many were then victims themselves of some kind of teen dating violence or other. They were teen moms. So I worked with them to try to help them, get on their feet, because the other thing with foster care that you might know is that, it cuts off at 18, or in New York, it's a little bit longer till 21, but they basically put kids out on the street. And these are the most vulnerable kids you can imagine, who've probably suffered some kind of abuse or neglect when they were very small, and then been within a system that quote unquote raises them. They basically have no parents and are put on the street when they're 18 or 21. So anyway, so I worked on representing these young women, and also I kind of represented many other teenagers, boys as well, who were aging out of foster care. And while I loved that work, it's hard. It's hard work. And when you work within what I've been calling the child welfare system, but we also often call it the family policing system because it is so problematic. But you're kind of banging your head against a wall a lot of times, because there's just so many systemic problems and so much bureaucracy, and that you can't get the results always that you want. You can't even really legally, you can't really advocate. I mean, I felt like I was not so much a lawyer most of the time, but like a social worker or someone who was just basically nagging the state agency to do their job. It didn't feel very legal, and didn't feel very like I was really making a difference. Although I did feel like on a one-on-one basis I was, but it's hard to make systemic change. So anyway, I then was really lucky and got another fellowship teaching at St. John's Law School in their child advocacy clinic. And again, was representing kids in foster care, more younger kids. And I did that for 2 years. And then I got very, very lucky. I've had a very, very blessed career. I got a professorship at University of Richmond School of Law. I was around 30 years old, and I was offered to come and start from scratch a brand new family law clinic. That was a dream come true, and I got to design it from the ground up. And I really was drawn to a population that literally was receiving no legal services. So children, as you might have gathered from everything I'm saying, children in foster care do get assigned court-appointed representation. It's called an attorney for a child. In other states, they get a guardian ad litem. But the adults in custody, in what's called private custody cases where child welfare is not involved, but they're just survivors trying to separate or trying to get child support, those adults do not get any representation. So I really wanted to fill that need. So in Virginia, in Central Virginia, we were the only pro bono legal service for anybody in any kind of family law matter. These are adults. And I was particularly interested in serving victims and survivors of domestic violence, because they are some of the most hardest cases for so many reasons, but relevant kind of to this podcast. I would say that representing children is extremely difficult, but the general public tends to have sympathy, whereas adults who are going through things that you might never have experienced or understand about domestic violence and about toxic relationships, they're less generally sympathetic, and they take a lot more out of a lawyer to really advocate and craft and portray their stories and portray the kind of abuse that they receive, to portray that in a way that then turns into court orders and things that actually keep them safe and that actually help them and their children thrive after hopefully separating from their abusive partners. So it's really hard work. Most people, if I even open my mouth and tell a little tidbit of something I'm working on, my friends and family are like, "How do you do this, Dale?"
Yep.
But I know you know that too. I know I've heard you say in your podcast, I really appreciate, which is like if these children had to experience this, then we should be able to at least hear it.
Right.
Yeah. And so I feel that way too. In my life, I feel like I can't do anything else because if I'm not doing something directly helping people in situations that are utterly unimaginable as a mother, as a wife, to think about the situations that these women are facing and the kind of no-win situations they're in and where everyone is against them. The court system is really, really not favorable to domestic violence survivors, despite what you may hear about politicians or whoever touting things that they are supposedly doing for victims. The bottom line is our society, in my opinion, they really don't believe the nuances and how domestic violence actually occurs. If you don't have a broken arm or a black eye, then our society really doesn't care. And certainly our judges do not care about creating safe custody plans post-separation that actually keep women and children safe. And relevant to this podcast, I'm at work right now on a very long law review article about child deaths that occur post-separation in domestic violence situations where judges believe that once a woman separates from her partner, the batterer, the abuser, that suddenly he can become an acceptable co-parent and now he's given 50-50 custody or other kinds of parenting time, despite all the evidence that the mother will show that should be a red flag that this person should not be given joint legal and joint physical custody. And over again, you see it. I mean, you literally cannot open the newspaper or the online news without seeing a story of a fatality of a child who is caught in the middle of a custody case. And invariably, it is a domestic violence case where the victim or survivor has presented evidence, and that evidence has either been kind of used to get a little protective order that expires. But even if they're given a protective order, there usually is a carve out in such a protective order, which says, except for when batterer is having custody. And we think everyone should have 50-50 custody because that's what is du jour in custody today, is that everyone is entitled to 50-50 or parenting time. And I don't think that without proper supervision and interventions for people who have abused their partners, I don't think that they should just be automatically given custody. And we see the horrific outcomes of this every day in these stories that you read. There's been a rash of them just this summer. I mean, I have a research assistant who is working with me on this paper, and I basically have him looking daily, and I have like 50 cases just this summer of children who have gone missing after an abuser had custody time or is murdered. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's a lot. So I give you a whole lot of credit for, I mean, you've immersed yourself for a lifetime in this sort of work. And it's incredible. You're in a position to actually make a difference, which is awesome.
Thank you. I try.
Using your law degree for good. I saw that on one of your articles, or it was a podcast I think you were on.
Yes. And I try. The other thing that I do love about I really have the best job in the world because I really get to still have direct client work, which is really what drives me, but I also get to teach and I get to hopefully encourage students to take this on, because so many law students, and you would know from, your work and interviewing experts and stuff, so many go into law school with some ideology or want to make the world better, and then they get jaded or they get caught up in corporate law and they forget. And so I like to try to brainwash them into to continue with this work. And many do. I mean, I've had so many students who didn't even know they wanted to do anything related to this. They only took my clinic because they wanted trial experience. And as a litigation clinic, and family court, as you might know, it's a trial-based system. I've had many students who just take my clinic because they want to be in the courtroom. And then they suddenly are like, oh, I want to represent families. Like, this is life-changing. Like, I can actually feel like I'm doing something for the world. And that just makes me very happy.
That's great. I'm glad. Having work that you love is so important. And the fact that you are making such a huge difference for just people, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is hard to express to anyone who hasn't been in that type of relationship why it's so hard to leave. And I saw that in a few articles you had written the old phrase, why didn't she just leave? And it drives me insane that people don't understand it. There's so much black and white thinking
Exactly.
that people can't wrap their brains around it. Well, just leave then.
Right.
But especially when there's not physical violence necessarily.
Right.
People just look at you funny, like, why do you need a restraining order if he never hit you?
Right. 100%. And a news story that everyone's aware of now, the whole P. Diddy stuff is, I'm going to have to restrain myself because I get so upset when I talk about that case. But that case, I mean, there's so many things that upset me. One is the fact that it's, I guess, good that there was a video or whatever, but the idea that there had to be a video of physical abuse in order for people to actually believe her. And from all I've heard from people I know who were in the courtroom during that month-long trial, Cassie was the most incredible witness, so credible, so moving. And what she described was so obviously her real experience. I mean, I always say to people, like, I don't understand. Why would someone be making this up? Like,
right. For attention.
Right. Like, what benefit? It only harms people when they come forward. They only get vilified. And if you listen to the way, I mean, I always tell people, first of all, there's such a myth that there's false allegations. That happens like none. Okay. It is very few and far between. And I will tell you that if you tell anybody who works in this world, just a little snippet of testimony of, we can tell immediately, oh, that's a pattern. That's coercive control. That's using power and money to intimidate. It's so obvious. Why do you need the bruise in order to see what is so clearly, I mean, also, so I could go on and on, but I mean, Cassie was like 18 when she met him. And I mean, there's so many things that it's so sick.
Seems like they're reading from the same playbook.
100%. 100%. It's the same playbook.
I'll pause here for a quick word from my sponsors.
And, the other thing that just we all know as advocates, but which still does not penetrate the court system, which is, of course, the abuser is always going to be charming and on point in court. Of course, they're going to, play I just want to see my kids. She's alienating me. I mean, they use the words that you see online.
Exactly.
They use these words, say she's alienating, say she's not co-parenting, say she's hysterical, all these things. And yet they fought for it.
Yeah, that's the hard part. It's the way they talk. They can charm pretty much anyone.
Exactly. And I heard, I think it was in your podcast, actually. It was said so well, which is just like, the whole thing is that they're in control. This isn't like they just snapped. They just lashed out. They just had one bad moment. That's not what it is. It's a slow and steady pattern. And the problem in family court is that we get so few. First of all, judges want cases to settle. They also want to go by this idealistic view that they have that, like, nowadays everyone, should have access, and that we should, joint legal custody is the default now in many state laws, which I am very much against. It should never be a default. It needs to be case by case basis. I'm sure if I could explain to your listeners, joint legal custody basically means that no decision, like major decision, can be made without the consent of both parents, which in an abuser's mind is, oh, yay, I get to terrorize post-separation my ex for the rest of for 18 years. Every time she goes to the doctor, I get to say, I have to be there. I have to make this decision. I get to withhold consent for child therapy, withhold consent for special education, whatever I want. It plays right into their hands.
Exactly. It's what they want the whole time. And that's why they wanted to have kids in the first place, honestly.
Exactly. Right. But that's the default. And I hate, it breaks my heart, but I have to train the students to explain to them, like, unfortunately, It's so hard to get a sole legal custody ruling, and you're oftentimes the judges don't like when you ask for that if the other parent is, unless the other parent is like abandoned the child. It's basically like a battle that we kind of have to give up, which I hate, but that's the culture. So then we just have to work to, the second best scenario with a really abusive situation is just to say, okay, let's just give him his joint legal and then get a safe parenting plan and then hope, which is the case sometimes, hope that eventually he loses interest because he didn't really care about the children. He just wanted to make your life miserable. Hope that eventually he loses interest, and which does happen a lot.
Yeah, they find a new partner.
Exactly. They get really, really intense filing for joint physical custody shortly after separation. And then once the chips fall and they get their order, then they basically like flake on their parenting time. And it's honestly the best case scenario sometimes. Just like
It is, yeah.
let's just get through this and hope. And I mean, I've had so many, this is so sad, but I've had so many clients who were in these thick of these torturous cases where, the other thing I write about and work on a lot is like every single one of these abusers calls CPS on their ex, claims, that she's whatever, claims she's not feeding them, claims she's this, that, the other. And so I've had so many clients that have been tortured post separation. And then with our advocacy, I've had some where we've been able to succeed in getting physical custody and a very limited parenting time. And then dad just disappears, literally disappears, because he really didn't give a crap about the children in the first place. And he moves on. And as long as, the other thing too, sadly, is as long as you're not bugging him about child support and he's just going into arrears with it, he doesn't really care.
Yeah, that's the sad part is as long as you're not having a negative effect on him or his wallet.
Right.
Don't get in the way of his life or his plans. If you don't harm him in any way, he's pretty much going to find a new target.
100%.
Unless he unfortunately does something terrible to the child or the mother or all three,
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing too. You see, I mean, I mentioned all the child fatalities and other kinds of abuse that have occurred post separation just within the last year. But then you also have the phenomenon that is increasingly common of the murder suicides.
I've wanted to write a book about that for so long. I mean, before I even started the blog, I had a spreadsheet that I was keeping of all of it's crazy how many there are, and it's so upsetting and so preventable in so many cases. But again, with the family court, it's your hands are tied.
I know. The murder suicides are, I mean, I had one that I represented in Virginia. The children were right there. Dad came in, shot mom, killed himself, and the children watched the whole thing. And there had been a custody, he wasn't supposed to, be over there, and he was, and
Oh, that's awful.
That case was so heartbreaking because then the children were put under the guardianship of some aunt who then stole their Social Security death benefits.
That's terrible.
I know. But the murder suicide thing, it's crazy. It's really, and for everyone that you happen to read about, there's 50 others that aren't making the news,
Right. They maybe make the local news, but they don't go nationwide unless it's something big like the father in Ohio who shot his 3 sons or something like that. If it's a major event, an outlier in some way, it might get larger attention. But otherwise, it's just like mundane at this point, like school shooting.
I know.
Oh, it just happens.
Right.
It doesn't have to happen.
I know. There was the one I cited, I think, in one of my pieces. There was the one in Chicago where the woman had a protective order active. She'd just gotten it. It had just been served, which is, of course, the most dangerous time. It had just been served. It was like, and she called 911 and she was like, I'm bleeding on the baby. And by the time they got there, she was dead. And the maybe mixing this one up, but they found the protective order like right there sitting on her microwave. Like, what is this piece of paper doing?
Right.
So another issue too that I write about that really seems so simple, makes me so upset, which is, there's federal law and it's been upheld now recently, even by this hostile Supreme Court, that if you have an active protective order against you, you are not supposed to have firearms.
That's not a given. You'd think that would be a given, right?
Right, I know. But the problem is, which my students are always like, I don't understand how this can be. They don't actually, when they serve an abuser with a civil protective order or even a criminal protective order, the cops, the sheriff who goes and serves it, they don't confiscate weapons. They don't even ask if they have weapons. It's a voluntary honor system that they're supposed to read the protective order and then go surrender their weapons. They're not confiscated.
And these people don't generally have honor. So I can't imagine them just handing in their weapons.
Correct. And also, the only people who ever do hand in their weapons are people who actually have licensed registered weapons because they don't want to run afoul. But almost everybody that I work with, their partner exes have unlicensed, unregistered, illegal weapons. So who the heck is going to go to the sheriff and be like, here are my weapons I'm not supposed to have because of this order that I just received that I don't give a crap about?
Yeah, that I'm probably not going to observe anyway.
Exactly. Which I had an abuser once say that his ex could wipe her ass with the protective order. And we actually got him to admit that in cross-examination that he had said that. But, that's how they feel. Yeah. So that gun thing is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's scary. In other countries, it might be a little easier to enforce, but not here.
Right. It's sick. I mean, I don't understand why we think that anything even makes a difference when we have more guns than we have like rats in this country.
It's insane. I saw one picture of this family who was so proud of their gun collection. They laid it out all over their huge deck and it covered every inch. And I'm just thinking, why? What for?
I know. I had some high-end clients in Atlanta who had like $500,000 gun collections that they would divide in their estates. Yeah.
Just collect art or something.
Yeah. That's another just a systemic problem, is back to your original question, which is like the horrible, ridiculous question that I tell my students never to ask is like, why didn't she just leave? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't go behind the reasons of what has driven her actions, but you don't ask that question in that way, in this kind of accusatory way. The questions that we should be asking is, why does our society make it so that she has no choices? And I will tell you, any advocate will say the same, which is there is nobody who is making more rational decisions on a daily basis in their life than a victim who has children, who is on a daily basis managing her family's safety. And so often, as with the protective orders and as with the custody stuff, it is safer for her and her children to stay, because not just economic reasons, but because of what will occur when she tries to leave. And, we all know the most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves. That's when most of these murders happen. So that just turns that whole question on its head. Why didn't she leave? The question should be the reverse. Like, what are we doing to help people leave? What are we doing?
How can we help you?
Right. How can we help you?
I love that you said that. I was reading a quote from one of your articles. Her years of silence weren't complicity. They were strategic survival in the face of credible threats to herself and those she loved. I got goosebumps when I read that. And it's just it's so pertinent. And I know that one was from the Diddy article, I think it was.
Yes.
But yeah, it's exactly that.
It is. It is. I mean, I don't know if you're a mom. Oh, I think you said you are a mom.
I am. Yeah. They're grown just about, but
I did this work before I was a mom and I cared deeply, but after being a mom and doing this work, it drives it even more home that like there is nothing I would do. I would lay my body down. I would jump into a pool of sharks to protect my children. And if my leaving of an abusive relationship was in any way going to have any negative effect on my children, I wouldn't do it. It's a rational decision.
Yeah, it's every day you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. And when they've already done such a great job of isolating you and taking away your support systems, and I mean, they do such a good job of that, they take away all the choices.
Yep. And then, yes, I had another quote right here I'm putting in my article, which is like, I couldn't leave and I had to leave because of my kids. It's like being torn in two.
Yes, that's so good. It's the kind of thing you can't foresee what will happen.
And to your point too about the isolation, That is really, I mean, it's so common. It's part of the playbook. And it happens, first of all, it's not like you go on when you're dating that like the abuser reveals himself. It's not like you get punched in the face in like your first date and you're like, I want more, like.
No, it's like a frog in a hot pot.
Right. And then also the isolation is not immediate. It's a slow chipping away of your autonomy. And it is a slow chipping away of your community. And you slowly start getting turned against your mom or your sister or whoever it is that is not falling for the abuser hook, line, and sinker. They slowly get that person phased out. They get you to another state, which is also something that is so challenging, which is, I'm not sure how much you know about relocation cases, but those are the worst. And essentially, wherever you have your child, like whatever state it is, like you better plan. I mean, unfortunately, you're probably never going to get out because courts, they don't like custody cases where one person wants to leave. And unfortunately, that's obviously usually the safest way. There is the Uniform Child Support Custody Enforcement Act. It does say that there's circumstances where if you're fleeing for danger, the state where you flee to can take jurisdiction over your case and issue a protective order or a custody order. The law says that, but what do you think happens when a woman does that? The abuser turns around that day and files his own custody petition saying she kidnapped the children. And what do you think the media and what do you think courts believe? Kidnap or abuse? They believe kidnap. Kidnap is what they believe. It's sick. They all say it.
Yeah, you hear about that an awful lot, actually. I spend a shameful amount of time watching police body cam videos for some reason. And I've seen so many of those where, they're looking for a woman and she's got her kid in this place and oh, well, she obviously kidnapped him. Let's cuff her.
Everyone believes it. And that's his playbook. Of course, he's going to say that. And then he'll file some custody petition in the state where she fled from and say, we've been living together. Everything's fine. She just ran away, like she's a crazy woman, ran away. And I should have custody. And then he'll get his own custody order. And then you've got these dueling jurisdictional custody orders. And it's always going to favor what's called the home state of the child. Like that's, the court's default.
Time for another quick sponsor break.
The other thing is, too, courts don't want cases. So, like, I had one in New York and North Carolina case. The New York court, these stores just don't want these cases. So, like, if there's any inkling or anything that they can hang their hat on to say, like, oh, the North Carolina dad is actually fine and decent, the New York court doesn't want to take a case. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
They don't want to protect women. They don't want to take on a new case. It's just another case on their docket. They don't want it. So if North Carolina is like, yeah, we have jurisdiction, we order dad custody, that's what they want to do.
Right. It is the path of least resistance.
Exactly. I mean, you're really in a no-win situation. And I'm just going to say this because I'm an honest, direct person and I don't know how else to be, but like, there are times when I would never give this legal advice because I can't give this kind of legal advice, but where behind closed doors, I will say to my colleagues, like in the instance of a woman fleeing, she's actually often better off just pulling a sleeping with the enemy move and like, remember that movie? Just disappearing with her children and changing her identity and never filing and running away. How sad is it that is, truth be told, sometimes my best solution?
I know it. There's been oh my gosh, so many comments that I've seen over the years of people saying you should have just taken him and gone, or I would have taken him and gone. But there's the other thing is if you get caught, that's federal charges.
Right. That's the thing. Like, I mean, the one that I cited before, the example of the custody case the woman who fled up to New York from North Carolina, she did the right thing. She didn't have a lawyer then, but she did the right thing. She went and filed for emergency, protective order and custody. And that's what triggered him to file his, you know what I mean? Like, but if she had just done what she's not supposed to do and fled and gone someplace that she couldn't be found with her children. And that's not the proper thing to do. But what I'm saying is that sometimes,
Right.
sometimes that's the safest, which is fucking insane that in the United States of America, that me, a legal expert, truthfully, behind closed doors, sometimes is like, oh, I wish they would just run away and disappear because I have no tools in my tool chest to protect this woman and her children.
Especially if the man has money.
Resources. Yep.
If he has money, you're done. That's it.
Done. Right. And I've had to have the conversation so many times because I don't like to sugarcoat things and I don't like to be, and I train my students. I mean, we want to always be trying to move things forward and make things better. But like, you also can't lie to a client. You also can't say, well, everything's going to be okay because it's not true. And I've had that conversation so many times where I've had clients say to me, I am in a bottomless hell. It's never going to get better. And I have to say, you know, I can't promise it's going to get better, but we're going to do whatever we can. But you're right. You are in hell. Like, I'm not going to deny your truth. Like, that is right.
There's no getting out. And you're basically, he's an albatross around your neck forever.
Right.
And I used to run a call center at a bank for many years. And whenever I had a new young lady come on working for me, and she had a boyfriend, a fiance, whatever, I would always tell her two things. One, remember you're marrying his family. And two, before you have kids, just make sure you understand what you're getting into because you're not getting back out.
Yep. Yep. That is the best. That is so true. And then I would add a third to that, which is whatever state you birth your baby in, prepare to stay there for 18 years.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Right. So I've had cases where, you know, a woman goes after college or whatever. If she's young, she goes, lives in some other state and then gets pregnant and then is like, well, why can't I just go back home? That's where my parents are. That's where I'll have all the help. But no, courts want you where you gave birth to your baby. If the dad is still there, you're staying.
Right. And good luck getting him to leave, especially if he has control issues.
Never. They'll never leave. And they'll make it impossible for you to leave. They'll object, obviously, to any kind of trying to leave. And the courts look very unfavorably on relocation. If any of your listeners are interested in it, like if you look up relocation case law, you'll see that those cases, even in the best of circumstances with, you know, the greatest facts, are near impossible to win. Sucks.
Yeah. I have to say, like, the only way that you're going to win the judge over if you're an abused woman who has very few resources is document everything as far back as you can and do it on an ongoing basis. There's no other way you're going to convince them that this really did happen.
There's no other way.
I think they call it a lovely term, but I think they call it a fuck you binder at this point.
Right. Yes. And also make sure that you get in whatever way, make sure you get a good lawyer. If you can, it's hard if you can't afford a lawyer, but try, like I've been saying, you know, wherever you are, see if there's a law clinic, law school, see if there's anybody who will take your case pro bono, because you need a lawyer that isn't, so many lawyers too, to be honest with you, that are either court appointed. By some states appoint lawyers for women and men in custody cases, not all, but they're court-appointed lawyers who are pushing cases through. They're not advocates, honestly.
No, they're the goodness of their heart.
Right. And they also are oftentimes, this is sad but true, they're oftentimes really just interested too in just getting cases settled so they can, you know, they have a huge caseload and like they're either afraid to go to trial. They don't actually have that much trial experience because most stuff does settle. And so they just kind of encourage women into things that they really don't like. We get so many clients who have had court-appointed counsel and then come to us when they've had bad orders that are not safe and not good. And then we're trying to modify them, which is in itself an uphill battle because once you get a custody order, it's not the easiest thing to modify it. You have an additional burden to overcome a change of circumstance. So many clients will have had kind of crappy lawyers who just basically were like, well, just agree to this co-parenting plan. It's fine, whatever. Move the case along.
Until it's not fine.
Until it's not fine, right? So you really got to, whatever you can, it is worth it to find a good lawyer who can tell your story, who can take your evidence, and don't think most clients, lay people, obviously they don't really know what is going to win over a judge or what is going to look good. Leave it to your lawyer to cull your notebook and figure out what is going to make your case. A lot of times clients think they have a smoking gun and like really that might actually reflect negatively on them, whereas something else they might have really will illustrate the pattern in a more legally effective way. So give your stuff to your lawyer and then trust your lawyer to tell your story, and find a lawyer who knows victims, who knows survivors, who knows this work, not somebody phoning it in.
Fulfilling their quotas or whatever.
Exactly.
I got so lucky with my situation. I just went to a lawyer, talked to her about I need a restraining order, showed her my binder, which literally was a 3-inch binder. And she took me on, she allowed me to do a payment plan, which was a godsend.
Yeah.
I paid it off for years, but it didn't matter to me.
Right. Oh, that's good. That is so important. I'm so glad that you were able to find someone who really advocated for you.
Yeah, it was very, very fortunate. I know a lot of people aren't able to find someone who can actually do that. And going into court by yourself in a situation like this must be a terrible idea.
It's awful and awful. And every, as we talked about before, the abuser's usually Mr. Charm.
Mm-hmm.
And the victim is not, because she's a victim.
Her brain has changed.
Right. We haven't even talked about this, but like trauma brain is a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you need a lawyer to be able to see everything and actually put it together, because I understand how trauma brain works. I understand that like you might remember something later that you didn't remember before, but that the timeline doesn't make sense. Or I can explain to a judge why she might have, quote, gone back, or why she took an action that might look like it was going against your argument, but actually can be explained because she's traumatized. But if you go in the court by yourself with trauma brain against an abusive, controlling manipulator, you're going to look like you don't know what you're talking about, like your story doesn't make sense, you're backtracking.
You're hysterical.
You'll
have people's eyes rolling, and it's not a good idea.
Right. Exactly. We still in the society, we don't believe, but if we do believe, you better be the victim that we want you to be. We want you to be the meek white lady who was, battered woman syndrome who appears. We don't want you, victim, to be talking back. We don't want you, victim, to be showing any gumption or not fitting a stereotype that we want. And we certainly don't believe Black and brown women. We don't. I can take the same case, same story, put in a person who looks like me, a little white lady, put in a Black woman who looks different from me, and I will be believed and she will not. Purely racial bias and discrimination.
And of course, no one will ever admit that. The judge would never admit that.
Yep.
No, that doesn't happen in this day and age. It does. It obviously does.
It does. It does every day.
It's got to be hard. You have enough hills to climb, if you're in this situation, let alone if you have to worry about racial discrimination on top of it.
And it trickles all the way down to like the clerks and all the other court people. I mean, I just tell this story. This is kind of a funny story, but I had tried for months with this client I had that was Black. This is before stuff was online. She tried to get these papers that she needed from the clerk, and like they were just really hostile to her because she wasn't presenting how they wanted. Then my students who were young, and they refused to give my students these papers. And then as kind of a social experiment, I had my mom visiting. My mom was at the time about 70 years old. She was just recently retired, a white lady, the perfect person to like ask for something because she's not quote unquote threatening, but also was knowledgeable. My mom's a lawyer herself. So she went in and she came out with 50 of the papers that we needed. They didn't even blink. They're like, here, older white lady, you can have access.
It makes you drop your jaw a little bit.
Exactly. I mean, it's so funny because we as say like, oh, we become invisible, but there are some benefits.
Right. I guess you're right on that. I'm gonna think of that next time I see a white hair in the mirror.
Right. It was so funny. My mom came back and she was like, oh yeah, here you go. They didn't even ask me a question. They were like, here you go. But that is such an example of just the biases that are so deep And I mean, even at the clerk's office too, in most family courts, like the clerks are the ones who are on the front lines who are giving the parties their papers, and they can so easily discourage someone from filing something. They're not supposed to give legal advice. They play a role in how things get filed. And if you're not fitting into like their stereotype, or if you're pushing back, you may have a different result than somebody who presents in a different way, if you know what I mean.
It's got to be so discouraging too. There's so many unwritten rules on top of all the written rules, which no, they don't necessarily follow.
Right. That's part of what I teach my students is like, you have no, I mean, when I was in law school, I had no idea all the things that were, you think you just go and you be a lawyer, but actually there's so many layers and so many other people involved that you don't really realize when you're just in school, which is part of also why I like to run the clinic. So I expose students to that world.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. It's got to be a learning experience.
It is. Yeah.
Now, time for one last sponsor break. There's a couple things I wanted to ask you before we end, because I was really interested in I think it was in the imprint, about the New York Office of Children and Families and opposing the Anti-Harassment and Reporting Act. So basically it's about anonymous reporting and how it's more harmful to children than it is helpful. It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yes. Well, this is an issue I've been working on for over a decade. And I believe very strongly in this. And when I explain it to anybody, if you actually listen and not get scared by the words because it seems scary, then I usually can make it clear. So what I advocate for and what all advocates want, domestic violence advocates and others, is for Child Protective Services hotlines that the public can call to operate on a strict confidentiality basis. And this is how they're supposed to operate, but they haven't always, and also they haven't actually explained it to callers. So in other words, you call in, just like if you call in Crime Stoppers in a criminal report, you have to give some basis for what you're saying. You can't just say some random thing without any basis. So what happens with anonymous reporting is, as we know from the internet, anonymity allows people to, without any repercussions, to just call. I mean, people can call over and over again. They don't have to give any information about who they are or anything about the call. They can just say, I mean, everybody knows how to make something a report that will get. CPS hotline workers are required to go to the home of anybody who's reported on within 72 hours and investigate.
Is that in New York? In a lot of states, they'll filter them out.
No. They only filter them to the extent of, like, you can't say, like, Mom put him in a purple shirt today. But anything that meets the level, and there's neglect is an extremely catch-all. Anything that meets anything, like he, came to school dressed messy or something, anything that meets any kind of remote connection to neglect. Yes, they are required by law in all states to go to the home and investigate. And going to the home means oftentimes strip searching children, also means going to the school and interviewing children, all on the basis of an anonymous, and almost always with anonymous reporting of a nefarious purpose. As I mentioned, abusers, but also landlords, nasty neighbors, all kinds of things, because they know there's no impunity. They just make a call and hang up. Think about how easy that is.
Right.
To do that to somebody. And anybody with good intentions, if the hotline worker actually explains this is strictly confidential, your identity or your even anything about you will never be disclosed. In fact, cannot be disclosed absent a court order. That is true. That is the law in every state. You can't find out. I can't find out if somebody made a report against me. I can't find out unless I petition the court and go through a lengthy process, which nobody ever does. So what has happened is that CPS hotline workers have not explained this. And so they've just said, oh, well, if you just want to do it anonymously, that's fine too. They haven't explained what strict confidentiality is. And so people make anonymous reports. But if we actually explained and followed strict confidentiality, there is zero reason to need anonymity. And like I said, it doesn't exist in any other situation. You can't just call the police and anonymously say something and then the police go and arrest somebody. That's not how probable cause works. That's not how anything works. And coming to your house and investigating your children is a traumatic experience, even if nothing happens from it. That is a traumatic, invasive, and violative of the Fourth Amendment, in my opinion, experience. And it's completely unnecessary. It's also a complete drain on resources. Imagine, hotline workers are going out on multiple calls, the same person who is investigated and closed, nothing's found. Then the abuser or whoever calls back again. They have to go back out again. Think of all the resources that is wasting when we have cases that need to be investigated and we're wasting time on these calls.
Yeah, I can see why it would be harmful in many ways. And it brings CPS or whatever the agency is in your state, it brings them into your life and you're pretty much not going to get rid of them.
Right. And also people are so afraid of this stuff, but they're the public, if they don't understand. I have found in all of my research, I spent so long on this and because it had not been studied extensively, and state agencies, child protective agencies are extremely purposefully opaque. You know this from your work.
Right.
You can't FOIA stuff, you can't get information. So they make it purposely opaque. They don't want you to know what they're doing because for many reasons they're not. There's a lot of problems. The data is extremely difficult to obtain, but in my study of this across the states, I have never found a single case of an anonymous call that was made where it warranted such extreme action that the child actually had to be removed from that. Most of the time when you make a call, the CPS worker goes out, and if they think there's anything that's possibly substantiated, it just results in a follow-up or some kind of preventive service being given. It hardly ever results in any, even on mandated callers, hardly ever results in an immediate removal.
Right. It'd have to be pretty serious.
Right. Or by court order. So all that said, there's no data that shows that any anonymous reports have ever resulted in immediate on-the-spot removal. And the other point too about the confidential reporting that's in the New York bill, which is if somebody calls and they're explaining confidentiality, strict confidentiality, and then they still are nervous, the bill requires that the call gets escalated to a supervisor who then will further explain, and then will also explain that if they think there's immediate danger, call 911. You can make an anonymous call to 911. That's the solution. If it's truly an immediate danger, call 911. Why are you calling CPS? CPS is an investigative agency. They don't address emergencies in the first place. So I just don't see any upside to anonymous reporting and a huge downside. I literally have no domestic violence cases where the abuser or someone in his family or one of his buddies or whatever hasn't called CPS on the survivor. It's the easiest thing to do. Think about it. You just call and you just say something, and then they have to go out there.
Even if they don't get the kids taken away, they have put a monkey wrench into the machinery. They've ruined your day.
Yep. It also gets recorded in a state database, which can have problems down the line for getting certain jobs. Bus driver, it can have problems down the line if you want to be a foster parent. I had so many cases when I was working with kids aging out of foster care where they would have some aunt or somebody come forward who was really stepping up to take care of this child, and then they would try to become a foster parent so they could get funding, and then they'd run a check on the hotline and they'd see that 20 years before there was some kind of call for marijuana or some stupid thing, and they'd be sorry, can't be a foster parent.
Wow. And when we need foster parents so desperately.
Exactly.
If they're smoking in front of the kids or something like that, I can understand maybe. But if it's just a report, especially if it was unfounded.
It was unfounded, or if it was something that occurred, I had ones that was 20 years before, and this person is stepping up, loving this child, this adolescent, and you want to turn them away?
Right. Yeah. Where else are they going to end up?
It doesn't make any sense.
No, there's so much room for error too.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's so much bias in the child welfare. I mean, I was in New York City, which had, at the time I was there, I think about 18,000 children in foster care in New York City. And I never once met a white child in foster care. Every single child was Black or brown or other minority.
There's a lot of implications there.
Yeah, not a single one. I never had a white client. I never saw a white client. I never saw a white one in the courtroom. No, there are no white families. And there are plenty of white people in New York City.
That's for sure. That really opens up a lot of questions. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is I've been saying this for years that abusive relationships and coercive control should be a part of sex ed. How hard would it be to accomplish something like that? Probably like climbing a mountain without shoes on, but that's something that I just feel so strongly about that. If I had any education at all on that kind of a topic and knew anything about what to look for, maybe, I wouldn't have had that situation. Or your parents can't always teach you those things because they don't always know.
Exactly. No, I couldn't. I'm so glad you said that because that's another thing. I think I might have had mentioned it in one of my pieces. But yeah, I believe that education should begin in terms of healthy relationships and from like kindergarten.
Yeah, especially, well, there's a situation where the children don't see it at home, so they don't know how to model it. But there's also a situation where their parents are perfect. They're not going to see negative things and they won't know that.
Yes, we need it. We need it. We need it. And I couldn't agree with you more. And we need a comprehensive curriculum on managing healthy relationships from 5 years old and certainly into high school. We need coercive control. That needs to be a unit in health education and how to maintain your autonomy and your self-determination as you move through the world. It is hard. It is hard for adolescents.
Yeah, when they're so young and they don't know what they're getting into. And yeah, they make terrible decisions. That's for sure. We know that. So yeah, if they could learn more about it, then maybe they would be able to take that in and maybe keep it in the back of their mind, even if they make bad decisions with their undeveloped brains.
Totally. Or at least go to somebody and say, I think I'm not sure about what this person is doing. And it sounds like something. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I had sex ed in the 90s. And that was the era of where they scared us to death of AIDS. And I fucking thought I had AIDS.
You will die.
We all thought we had AIDS, right?
They still thought abstinence education would work.
Exactly, right. But like, that's the thing. Like, if you hear these things in your curriculum, it will trigger something in your head, or you might forget. And then years later, you're in a relationship and you're like, why does this sound familiar? I remember Mrs. So-and-so talking about this or watching some film yeah, it's so important. But like you said, I mean, we're not exactly in a good era for sex ed in this country. So.
And we don't even have laws about coercive control in every state. So
exactly.
So many things, so many hurdles to overcome.
I know.
At least in some states, it is starting to be.
It is. California passed it. It's codified in California that coercive control is a part of domestic violence. I'm working hard to get it in more states, but we still also have the other thing that I really fight against is the statutory provisions that either the default to legal custody, and the other one that is a problem is the whole quote unquote friendly parent statutes, which say that like co-parenting, how friendly you are to the other parent is like a factor in custody, which sounds good on paper.
Right. But if he's never been nice to you before now, why is he going to start?
Exactly.
Especially when he wants control of you.
Yeah. It's a very problematic provision that people don't really question unless it happens to them. And then you get in the situation where I'm advising people, well, like, you can't protect yourself like this because you're going to look, quote, unfriendly, which.
Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. I don't want to be friendly with my abuser, but.
Right.
It's so scary for anyone who's in that situation that now you have to be nice to him.
I know. And put on some kind of show, or else he's going to say in court, I mean, all the things. They will come in and say, she didn't, he'll change the schedule 50 times. And then suddenly it will become your fault that like.
Oh, she's just being difficult. And I don't know where they're getting this book or who's handing it to them, but we need to take it out of circulation. Enough of that already.
Well, the manosphere doesn't help.
That is, oh my, it's so toxic.
And the father's rights, which we didn't even talk about, but
It was at the back of my mind, yes, the whole time, because that's what happened. That's why this whole 50-50 thing. And I get that if you're a good dad, sure,
Right.
that's one thing.
Right. But no, the fathers, that's part of my like long article, which when it's done, I'll send you. But it's just the history of how that has been so distorted into what it is now, the whole father's rights stuff. And it's also putting it as the child is some piece of property. I have a right to 50-50. Like,
You just tell them they're a pawn,
right. I have a right to split my child in half. That's not how we should be determining custody. It's not splitting up marital assets.
Right, exactly.
And the number, it's in my article, but I think it's like 70% of domestic violence of abusers petition for primary or 50-50 custody, whereas like only like 30% of non-abusing fathers do. Like it's so clearly the playbook.
Yeah, exactly. Because then he has you under his thumb forever.
Exactly. I'd love to keep this open dialogue with you. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely. It's so good to talk to someone who really gets it, and you really understand all of this stuff from so much experience. And yeah, so I appreciate this. Thank you so much for telling us.
Well, thank you for doing this work. I feel like public awareness is really such a part of moving things forward. I mean, I even have with my relatives and stuff who like hear me talk about this stuff, and sometimes they're like, "Oh, now I understand why she can't leave." Like, like
Right. If their eyes don't glaze over, they get it. Yeah.
right. They're like, I did believe you before, but I didn't really understand until I read this or you explained this one story. And now I see. And I'm like, good.
Yes, that's all it takes. Chip away slowly but surely. Yeah.
Exactly.
Huge thanks to Professor Cecka for taking the time to speak with me. I'll include the links to some of her published works in today's show notes. Before I sign off, I want to give a shout out to my newest patron. Thank you to Gail from the town of Bedrock. Thank you so much, Gail. To help support the show, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. Also, shout out to my newest YouTube channel member, Jennifer L. I appreciate you so much, Jennifer. Thank you to all my supporters for helping me keep the show going. That's it for this episode. Join me next time for another story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.